All right. Thank you for the great introduction. And thank you to the Social Innovation Summit for bringing us all together. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gwyneth Gaul, Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships and Community Impact at Comcast, NBCUniversal. I have the privilege of working with my colleagues to advance our $100 million commitment to social justice and equality and our 10-year, $1 billion commitment to digital equity. We believe that digital equity, the equal access to technology and the capacity to use it, is central to social equity. And our conversation today focuses on one aspect of our model for change: supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs and leaders with the business resources and skills needed to create their own success. We believe working to foster the success of more entrepreneurs of color is one of the most consequential actions we can take in the fight for social and economic justice. And our panelists have a lot to say about putting this belief into practice. I could absolutely fill our entire session celebrating the many accomplishments of these women on this stage, but to summarize it, these leaders have the same superpower. They find, cultivate, and champion ideas and innovators that will better the world. Let me briefly introduce our speakers. Melissa Bradley is the founder and managing partner of 1863 Ventures, an organization that bridges the gap between entrepreneurship and equity by funding new majority entrepreneurs. She's also the co-founder of Ureeka, an innovative tech platform for entrepreneurs. Cheryl Dorsey is the president of Echoing Green, the social impact powerhouse that supports next generation talent as they solve the world's biggest problems. And Dr. Angela Jackson is managing partner at the venture philanthropy organization New Profit and leads their Future of Work initiative, which seeks to close the career readiness gap for Americans from low-income backgrounds. Thank you all for being here today. It is such an honor. So to kick things off, I think we'll start with Melissa, and maybe all of you could follow on. We know Black and Brown entrepreneurs and small businesses are severely underfunded and under-resourced, often preventing them from fully transitioning to the digital economy. Each of your organizations is tackling this challenge in a different way, but Melissa, maybe you could highlight one approach you are taking to support more entrepreneurs of color.
Thank you, and I am honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and great to see two amazing women who I can call friends, some a little bit longer than others, but we're all in this fight together. I think it's a great question because I think too often people believe that entrepreneurs just need money, and the reality is they need a combination of financial and non-financial assets. So at Ureeka, we specifically started the tech platform because of amazing organizations like New Profit and like Echoing Green, who are really focused on community and working in cohorts. But even whether they graduate from any of their organizations, 1863 or someone else, they still always need some longitudinal support, oftentimes one-on-one, and that continued community. So Ureeka was really created to complement and supplement the great work that these folks are doing on this call, but all across the country to say, we have communities hosted. The purpose of Ureeka is to really de-risk entrepreneurs by keeping them connected to the communities they came from. So having a Comcast community, having an Echoing Green community, but also infusing that with what we call always-on coaching, which are experts across the country who are former entrepreneurs, corporate executives, et cetera. And then we obviously also provide training and programs through the platform. The best thing, the thing I'm most proud of is that, unfortunately, post-George Floyd, we've been able to deploy over $150 million to over 10,000 entrepreneurs through partnerships and grant programs such as yours and many others. And so I think what we found is that money is a great tool, but we also find that it's paralyzing. When you're a person of color, let me speak from my own space, and I got my first check, I had never had that much money before. And unfortunately, it still didn't account for all the things I needed. And so we realized that money is great, but those non-financial resources of helping them how to spend, how to be strategic, how to invest and build for scale. Who was your first hire? That's the kind of support that entrepreneurs need, and they can get it through a formal organization or they can get it through informal mentorship and coaching. But while I would say entrepreneurs of color have amazing social capital, I didn't meet my first Black CEO till I sold my first company. So we have different social capital, and so we need all hands on deck to help us navigate these very choppy and uncertain waters when you're trying to grow a business.
I can really appreciate that. At New Profit, we really intentionally invest in what we call proximate entrepreneurs. So those who have lived the experience that they're trying to solve, or they have some hard-won professional experience. So you see a lot of the entrepreneurs that we're investing in, they're coming from the communities that they're aiming to serve. And similar to what you said, Melissa, they may not have had the benefit of going to business school or a wide social network. And so when we're trying to work shoulder to shoulder with these entrepreneurs, we need to look at them holistically, right? What all do they need? Capital being one, but what is that technical support that's actually going to get them on the pathway to more success and doing more good in the world? And we recently did that with the Future of Work Grand Challenge. We put out a $15 million challenge to take entrepreneurs, who we call proximate entrepreneurs, to help people get back to work. So to really understand what are the barriers to work in their communities and how they through their solutions, their entrepreneurial ventures, could train people in their neighborhood to do jobs for the future. And all through the line, we knew immediately when you had unprecedented numbers of unemployment that you needed people, entrepreneurs with unique insights to solve this problem, because it wasn't working. The workforce wasn't working for many before the pandemic, and certainly it's not working in the pandemic. So we wanted to do something different.
Gwyneth, it's so great to be here with you. Thank you for hosting us. I'm beyond honored to be here with my friends, Melissa and Angela. And in settings like these, I always like to start off by recognizing the indigenous people of the land where I now sit, the Nacotchtanks. And the name is actually derived from the word Anakwa-Shatanik, which means a town of traders. And I think we all know these kinds of land acknowledgements, while important, are not enough, but they're an important decolonial practice that really promotes indigenous visibility. And in many ways, we're here together today to talk about visibility. So appreciate Comcast really raising up this question about how do we support more entrepreneurs of color. I think all of us got into this work in part because we scoped the problem. So from my vantage point, when you look at the philanthropic marketplace, domestic grant dollars for people of color represent only 10% of the total domestic U.S. grant dollars. And it gets worse as you start to segment the audiences, Gwyneth. Only 0.6% of these dollars go to women and girls of color, only 0.3% to men and boys of color, 0.5% to the AAPI community, and 0.02% to transgender people of color. So the need is big, which is why it's so important to have organizations like New Profit, 1836, Echoing Green, sort of stepping into this void, doing the work that we do in the ways that we do it. And for Echoing Green, in the aftermath of the murder of Mr. Floyd, the devastating impacts of COVID-19, we launched a racial equity philanthropic fund that is trying to tackle this issue from a systems level and really rests upon three pillars. One is we've committed over the next 3 years to identify and launch and scale 120 new social enterprises and another 380 existing social enterprises within our network, helping them to get to the next level of impact. We're also going out into communities around the country to mobilize and upskill 5,000 next generation leaders of color on social innovation principles and practices, including key settings like HBCUs. And last but not least, we've made a pretty bold commitment to engage deeply with upwards of 10,000 corporate leaders as critical and meaningful allies in the fight for racial equity. So a holistic approach. We all have to be in it together, as Melissa said, but this is a moment when we see a crack in the universe, and I think we're all here today because we're equally committed to the work.
Yep, I think that's spot on. And you brought up George Floyd's murder, and I think in many ways it was a catalyst for a broad number of commitments that companies made, others made across the board. And so I think when we think about the effort to support a broader movement for sustained change, not just a moment, but a movement, particularly in the area of supporting diverse founders, are there some bright spots? Are there areas of hope that you're seeing exposed in these cracks? And I'd say also, what are maybe some of the biggest areas of opportunity? Angela, how about you start this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I am actually going to tip to my friend Cheryl, who's on with us right now. You know, the fund that she's putting together and the level of collaboration that we're seeing through what I would call ordinarily unlikely bedfellows coming together and putting their egos aside, right? In philanthropy and investing, sometimes we're siloed. We're all about what our money can do for our particular issue. What we're starting to see in this moment, and I hope it continues, is that you got funders who say normally they're workforce funders, or other ones that say we're post-secondary funders. And we've seen them say, you know what, we're willing to drop that to be part of something bigger and to really make a change. And that's important too, because when you look at a learner, a worker, an entrepreneur, like those silos that we have the privilege of having in philanthropy and investing, they don't exist in the real world for real people. So that radical collaboration that we're seeing, the willingness for people to name racial equity and put their money behind it, is what gives me hope right now. And now you just have to wait and see the receipts, right? With commitments, right? We want actions and just seeing how that's going to play out.
Yeah, that's a great point. Melissa, Cheryl, might either of you add to that?
I think there's a few bright spots. One, I would say on the investment side, the growth of funds managed by Black GPs is wonderful. Footnote, I wish there were more Black female GPs, but we'll take the Black GPs. And I think that's been great. So at least while they're still considered micro venture funds, I'd say we at least now have a source of capital for entrepreneurs for at least the next 3 to 5 years, irrespective of what happens in the corporate world. And I certainly hope that that continues. So that's been huge. I think the other piece is the narrative is beginning to change. I think there has been a lot more positive press, positive conversations, a lot more of these forums where we're not just talking about the problems, but highlighting real opportunities. And I may not have the exact number, but we finally crossed over beyond just the 30 Black women that ever received venture funding. I think we're now almost at 50. So slow growth, but at least it's steady, which was prior sporadic. And I think those are bright spots. And I guess the final takeaway is, and I think this is probably more in the boardrooms where sometimes I'm invited but don't have a permanent seat. I think Cheryl shows up a little bit more, I hope, is that the conversation is changing. I know a lot of folks who have been in the DEI space for a long time, and they're saying, look, people still are not necessarily getting it right, but they're willing to put in the work. And so that causes a little level of optimism that this will not be a moment, that this will extend hopefully for the next 50, 60, 100 years, well beyond, hopefully we're having to do this. And I would say, I think that's important for a couple of reasons. I think Cheryl's report, which is just so critical, that we can no longer rely just on the philanthropic community to change what is happening because the funding doesn't exist. And we need people like Comcast and others to think outside the box of how do you really address the core inputs of racial and systemic injustice. And again, it's not just dollars, but how do you create collaboration? How do you support community? How do you pull likely and unlikely suspects together? So I think there's been some signal effects by corporations across all sectors that says we really want to dive deep. This is more than a one-year commitment, and how do we really get this right? And I think just those open and honest conversations and a greater risk tolerance of those dollars and times and investing in communities that look like mine, that's a pretty big step.
Yeah, and Gwyneth, I will say, and first I'm going to thank you again for setting this table with such brilliant women. So to be able to draft in the wake of Melissa and Angela, wish all of my panels were this perfect. So thank you for that. And I couldn't agree with them more. I mean, I think I would characterize myself as a realistic optimist. So look, when we look at what has happened since last summer, there are still significant parts of this country that have actually become less supportive of efforts like Black Lives Movement than they were before the murder of Mr. Floyd. That trend seems unlikely to reverse anytime soon. So we're in it. It is an uphill battle, but we're in it. And I agree with both Angela and Melissa. There are bright spots, and I'll just sort of add on to what they already said so beautifully. I would say certainly a bright spot in philanthropy. When you look at some of the research that has come out of CDP and Candid, when they released that report last August that showed there was like $12 billion that was moved in response to COVID, but only about 5% of it was explicitly directed to folks of color. When they came back in March, they actually looked at a significant uptick to about 23% of dollars in that interim period was explicitly designated for communities of color. So that shows real momentum, a sea change in how people are thinking about their work and bringing a race-informed lens to it. So I'm excited about that. I actually also agree with what Melissa was saying about sort of getting into the capital markets. And I think sort of the way that ESG has shown up in this way, sort of showing that increasing preference to engage with businesses that prioritize purpose alongside profitability. And when I heard Larry Fink sort of raise up the S in ESG in Davos, that shows you that these conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion are now going to be linked to business performance. I think that's a phenomenal bright spot. And I think you, Comcast, have been an incredible leader in that. And then last but not least, and I think, certainly Angela and I see this all the time in our work, leaders of color doing social impact work are stepping up. They are raising their hand. They are owning their agency to drive work that they know needs to be done in their community. And, we just closed the next selection round for our very early stage fellowship program. And we received over 1,500 submissions from next gen voices all around the world. Folks are energized, mobilized, and engaged. And I think ultimately that's a phenomenally good signal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sadly, our time is starting to dwindle, but I think in closing, obviously the Social Innovation Summit brings together an extraordinary audience. There's funders and philanthropists and corporates and entrepreneurs. Can you share some paths for those in the audience that might want to engage a bit further in your organization? So I know, Cheryl, we've talked about the Racial Equity Fund and the work. Maybe specifically you want to talk about something tangible for the audience to engage.
Sure. And I think I really appreciate sort of the solutions action orientation that you've posed to us, Gwyneth. So let me start off at sort of a macro level. The leaders that you all have assembled have a really important role to play. And I'll ask for 4 things. 1, please, please, please invest in intermediaries that sit between the rooftops and the grassroots. You've got 3 of us convened around this table who are doing that work and who sit in those interstitial spaces. We're good at what we do. Please partner with us. The second thing is continue to dismantle structures that harm proximate groups, like all of the onerous paperwork that's required and that often disadvantage smaller organizations. Continue to be really flexible in your funding. It makes a difference to these extraordinary groups on the ground doing the work. As Melissa said perfectly, change the face of who's giving money, akin to what we're seeing in the for-profit world. This diversification of fund managers is a great model for all of us in the social impact sector to model. And then we've got to remain accountable to what we said we were going to do, and promises need to be kept. So how do we set up our goals, our targets, and set up transparent and accountable systems to track those? Those are all the things that we all need to do collectively. Specifically to Echoing Green, thank you for mentioning the Racial Equity Philanthropic Fund, Gwyneth. We wouldn't be able to do the work without you and Comcast as key partners. Please join us. This is much about learning as it is about doing, and we need more folks to join us. In a few days, the Echoing Green family will be convening for our annual gala that will raise up some of these proximate voices. So if you go to the Echoing Green website and click on the link to get involved, please join us for our virtual convening, our big, bold gala. We'd love to see all of you and just continue this really important conversation. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Cheryl. Melissa?
I'll keep it quick. I think there's 4 things. 1, invest. To Cheryl's point, invest in the organizations because we've been doing this a long time. There's a lot of knowledge and institutional history we have that just is not easily replicated. Invest in entrepreneurs themselves, whether that's through investment capital or making a grant. I think buy, that's the biggest thing. Sales are the best thing that keeps businesses afloat. So let's not subsidize their growth, but actually buy their products and tell other people to buy them. Promote what's working. 3 of us on the phone, but there's many other organizations. We've got to stop assuming one person can do it all. So promote what is working, and then educate. Education is a lifelong process, and there's going to be things that folks don't know. So it's great to be an ally, but it doesn't stop. It's not check the box, I got my certificate. So continue to educate yourself. To Cheryl's point, there are so many challenges in their communities that are historical, from 100-year celebration of Tulsa to 400 years of slavery to the current marginalization of Native peoples. And so education is extremely important.
Yeah, just to build on that, when I think of the ask, I probably have a couple of them. One is just as investors, as supporters, we just need to acknowledge that entrepreneurs, specifically proximate entrepreneurs, they need different access to different types of capital at different times throughout their life cycle. So just because you gave someone an entry-level grant or you made a friends and family investment, the life cycle to build a sustainable business is much longer than that. So I would just encourage people on the phone to dig in and be willing to go kind of the long game with these entrepreneurs and solutions if you believe in them. The second thing that I talk about is moving from this idea of charity. You know, we have entrepreneurs out there now that are doing for-profit ventures. Some of them are doing nonprofit. It's really not about charity. It's about us, right? All of us in the room, all of us on the screen. How do we create a better world and more equitable world for us? I talk a lot about an equitable future of work. It's not only good for the folks who are living out in the margins, it's actually good for our country. And so a lot of what we're doing with New Profit now and our initiatives, we're bringing them under an economic mobility umbrella. There's two tactics that we're leading now with the future of work, but there'll be others. And our goal is really clear. How do we get more workers into middle wages? How do we get more workers having living wages? And that's our mandate in this moment.
Thank you all. I am so humbled to be on this stage with you three fine, fabulous women. It has just been a true pleasure. Thank you to the Social Innovation Summit for bringing us together and setting this stage, and look forward to more discussions in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.